Welcome to Science Exposed, the podcast where we take a deep dive into the most fascinating corners of science. This episode is brought to you by the brilliant mind of Dr. Cameron Jones, PhD, who curates all the amazing topics we explore.
And today we're tackling a subject that's hilarious and surprisingly complex: the science of stand-up comedy.
Oh, okay. Let's unpack this.
Yeah.
You sent over this research article that analyzes stand-up comedy routines using data, like actual data about the words comedians use.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued, to say the least.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that this research goes beyond just figuring out what makes a joke funny. It actually looks at how audience reactions are tied to the language comedians use.
So is there like some secret linguistic formula that can predict whether a comedian will bomb or get rave reviews?
That's what this study set out to explore. They analyzed transcripts from a bunch of stand-up routines using something called the Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, or LIWC for short. Think of it like a superpowered word counter that categorizes language based on its psychological and emotional impact.
So it's not just what words they're using, but the kinds of words. Right, like are they using a lot of emotional language or intellectual words or maybe a lot of slang?
Exactly. They focused on three key areas: cognition, which refers to the use of words related to thinking and processing information; affect, which looks at words conveying emotions; and social processes, which includes words related to relationships, social roles, and group dynamics.
Okay, so they ran all these stand-up routines through this linguistic analysis, and what did they find? Did the funniest comedians use a certain type of language?
Well, the results were pretty surprising. You might assume that crafting clever jokes requires a ton of complex thinking and wordplay, but the study actually found that comedians use fewer words related to cognition compared to everyday conversation.
Wait, really? That's counterintuitive. I would have thought they'd be using, like, more sophisticated language.
It seems there's more to humor than just being clever or intellectual. What they did find was that comedians used significantly more words related to negative affect.
Negative affect. So we're talking about negative emotions like sadness, anger, anxiety.
Precisely. And even swear words, which are often used to express negative emotions. This might seem counterintuitive, but think about it. A lot of humor is based on awkward situations, personal failings, or societal taboos.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean. Comedians often tap into those uncomfortable topics to create tension, and then they release that tension with a punchline. It's like a pressure valve for our emotions.
That aligns perfectly with the classic relief theory of humor. The idea is that laughter is a way to alleviate stress and cope with difficult situations.
So embracing discomfort, even negativity, is a key ingredient in successful stand-up. It's that tension and release that gets people laughing.
It seems so. But it's not just about negativity. The study also found that comedians use significantly more words related to social processes compared to everyday speech.
Interesting. So they're not just making us laugh at their own expense, they're bringing in broader social experiences.
Exactly. They make references to family, friends, gender roles, even moral judgments. By tapping into shared social norms and experiences, they're creating a sense of connection with the audience. It's like they're saying, we're all in this together.
So we've established that comedians use more negative emotions and social references than the average person. But does this linguistic cocktail actually translate to higher ratings? Did the researchers find any correlation between language and audience reception?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the answer is yes. But it's more nuanced than simply saying more of this, less of that.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about these nuances. What kind of language patterns lead to those rave reviews?
Well, one finding that jumps out is that male comedians, on average, received higher ratings than female comedians.
That's disappointing, but unfortunately not entirely surprising. We still have a long way to go in terms of gender equality, and the world of comedy is no exception.
Absolutely. The study authors acknowledge this historical bias, and it's something we all need to be mindful of when evaluating comedic performances. But beyond that, they discovered some fascinating patterns related to the specific types of language used.
Let's hear it. What did they find?
When it comes to negative affect, it's not just about expressing negative emotions in general. They found a distinction between expressing negative emotions and dwelling on negative moods. Simply expressing negativity boosted a comedian's rating, but focusing too much on things like anxiety, sadness, or anger had the opposite effect.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, a dash of negativity to spice things up, but not so much that it becomes a downer.
Precisely. Audiences seem to appreciate comedians who can acknowledge life's darker moments without getting bogged down in them. A sprinkle of negativity can create tension and release, but an overload can just bring the mood down. It's a delicate balance.
Fascinating. So what about the social dimension? Did the use of social references impact ratings in any way?
You bet. And this is where we see some really intriguing patterns emerge. The study found that using social reference, specifically references to females, was associated with higher ratings.
Really? That's interesting. But it's not quite as simple as saying, talk about women, get higher ratings, right? It's more
Yeah.
about how those references are used.
Exactly. Remember, humor thrives on unexpected twists and subversions. It's not just about the topic itself, but how the comedian uses language to play with expectations and challenge social norms.
Okay, I'm following. What about other social categories? Did any of them have a negative impact on ratings?
Interestingly, the study found that using moralization, making strong moral judgments, was associated with lower ratings.
So being too preachy can actually backfire.
It appears so. Audiences seem to appreciate comedians who push boundaries and challenge social norms, even if it means getting a little uncomfortable.
That makes sense. Comedy is often at its best when it's a bit edgy and unpredictable.
Precisely. But it's a delicate balance. Comedians need to find a way to be provocative without alienating their audience.
So, to recap, a little negativity is good, but too much is bad. Social references, particularly those about women, can boost ratings, and being overly moralistic can hurt a comedian's score. Did I miss anything?
Just one last point. The study also found that recent shows tend to get lower ratings compared to older ones.
Interesting. Do you think that's because newer comedians are just not as funny? Or could there be other factors at play?
I highly doubt it's a matter of comedic talent. It's more likely due to audience nostalgia, the time it takes for shows to accumulate ratings, and maybe even the challenge of living up to the legacy of comedic legends who came before.
That's a great point. We often romanticize the past, and comedy is no exception. There's something special about those groundbreaking performances that pave the way for modern comedy.
Indeed, it's a reminder that comedy is a constantly evolving art form, and each generation of comedians builds upon the work of those who came before. But what's really fascinating is that even something as seemingly spontaneous and effortless as stand-up comedy has these hidden complexities and patterns waiting to be discovered.
It really makes you think about all the work that goes into crafting a successful stand-up routine. It's not just...
Precisely. But it's important to remember that LIWC is just a tool. You know, it can highlight interesting trends, but it doesn't tell the whole story.
Right, like you were saying earlier about how simply counting words can only tell us so much.
Yes, the idea that simply counting words can't fully capture the nuances of humor. We need to consider context, individual differences, and all sorts of other factors.
So while the LIWC analysis is a great starting point, it's not some kind of magic formula for comedic success.
Exactly. There's no algorithm that can guarantee laughs. Comedy is a complex art form that involves timing, delivery, stage presence, and a deep understanding of the audience.
Yeah, it's about connecting with people on an emotional level, making them think, making them feel.
And sometimes it's about pushing boundaries, challenging norms, and making people question their assumptions.
All while making them laugh, of course.
Of course. Laughter is the ultimate goal, but the best comedians can do so much more than just elicit a chuckle. They can make us think, make us feel, and make us see the world in a new light.
So what can aspiring comedians learn from this research? Should they, start peppering their routines with more swear words and references to women?
I wouldn't recommend taking the findings that literally. It's not about blindly following a formula.
Right. It's more about understanding the underlying principles of humor, the different levers you can pull to create tension, surprise, and ultimately laughter.
Exactly. Think about the emotional journey you want to take your audience on. What kind of emotions do you want to evoke? What kind of social dynamics do you want to explore?
And remember, authenticity is key. Be yourself, find your own voice, and don't be afraid to experiment.
Absolutely. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to comedy. What works for one comedian might fall flat for another.
It's about finding your own unique style, your own comedic rhythm, and connecting with your audience on a genuine level.
And never underestimate the power of hard work and dedication. The best comedians are constantly honing their craft, studying the masters, and experimenting with new material.
It's like they're scientists in a way, always observing, analyzing, and testing out new hypotheses.
Except their lab is the stage, and their experiments involve making people laugh.
Huh. I love that analogy. And who knows, maybe someday there will be a whole scientific field dedicated to the study of comedy.
The science of laughter. I like the sound of that.
Me too. But until then, We'll have to rely on insightful research like this study to give us a peek behind the curtain of stand-up comedy.
And remind us that even something as seemingly spontaneous and effortless as stand-up comedy has its own hidden complexities and fascinating patterns waiting to be discovered.
Speaking of discoveries, this deep dive has been a real eye-opener. Who knew there was so much science behind making people laugh?
It just goes to show that there's always more to learn, even about something as familiar and beloved as comedy.
And for our listeners out there who want to learn even more about the science of stand-up, be sure to check out the show notes for links to the research we discussed today.
We've also included some bonus material about the different theories of humor and some fascinating insights into the history of stand-up comedy.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Science Exposed for more fascinating explorations of the scientific world.
We're always looking for new topics to explore, so if you have any suggestions, be sure to let us know in the comments.
Thanks for joining us today on Science Exposed. Until next time, stay curious. This research really makes you think about the power of language.
Doesn't it?
The words we choose, the way we phrase things, it all has an impact on how our message is received. And that's especially true in comedy, I think.
Absolutely. Comedians are like masters of language. They understand the nuances of word choice, the rhythm and cadence of speech, and how to use language to create surprise, tension, and release.
It's like they're composing a symphony of words, carefully orchestrating each element to evoke a specific emotional response from the audience.
Yeah. And just like a musician spends years mastering their instrument, comedians spend years honing their linguistic skills, developing their own unique voice and style.
Right. And this study also highlights the importance of context, right? The same joke can land completely differently depending on who's telling it, where it's being told, and the overall cultural climate.
Yeah, context is everything in comedy. A joke that might be hilarious in one setting could fall completely flat in another. It's all about reading the room.
Comedians have to be incredibly attuned to their audience, reading their reactions, gauging their sensibilities, and adjusting their material accordingly.
It's a delicate dance, a constant negotiation between pushing boundaries and staying connected with the audience. One wrong step, and you can lose them entirely.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the linguistics of laughter, what's the key takeaway for our listeners? What do you hope they walk away with?
I think it's this. Humor is a powerful tool. And language is the key to unlocking its potential. Whether you're a comedian, a writer, or just someone who enjoys a good laugh, understanding the nuances of language can help you craft more effective, more engaging, and more hilarious communication.
Well said. It's about understanding the tools of the trade, even if you're, not a professional comedian. So, to all our listeners out there, if you're looking to add a little more humor to your life, pay attention to the language you use.
Yeah.
Think about the emotions you want to evoke, the connections you want to create. Don't be afraid to experiment and play with language to find what works for you.
Exactly.
And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the science of stand-up comedy, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Science Exposed for more fascinating explorations of the scientific world.
And be sure to check out the show notes for links to the research we discussed today, along with some bonus material on humor theory and the history of stand-up.
Thanks for joining us on this hilarious and insightful journey. Until next time, stay curious.